Good. So welcome to Being Marketers, the webcast. We're really excited to have you. I am Emily Soccorsy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Root and River, and I am with Justin Foster, who is also the co-founder.
Hello, everyone.
And we'll be introducing our esteemed guest in just a moment, but we also have another team member on the call, our amazing Chief of Staff, Kat Weiss, who's going to be hanging out as the audience ambassador. So she'll be hitting up the chat with some quotes and cool things that Ryan says, and then she'll also be on the lookout for your questions. First, a little bit about Being Marketers Webcast. We started the webcast about a year ago during the pandemic, and we're like, what can we do? How can we contribute? And we really wanted to start having some real conversations with marketing leaders who are in the trenches just like you, to have them share a little bit of their wisdom, talk to us about the things that piss them off, the things that make them happy, but then also to dive into how do they hold up, right? How do they take care of themselves in the world of branding and marketing, which can be a bit of a grind. So it was very important to us that we interview people that have been in your shoes and that also have done some extraordinary things in their career, so we can all learn from them. So that's what we're all about. Our vibe is very informal, but also incisive. So we ask some deep questions. And if you like that whole vibe, if you like what you hear, we really want to invite you to join the Being Marketers community. It is a community for ethical and soulful branding practice. This is a place where we all get together and share ideas like the ones you're going to hear today, and we support one another in practicing what we call intrinsic branding. So the community is there as a support system, as an inspiration point, and we launched it 3 months ago. This is our 3-month birthday, guys. Isn't that exciting? So if you would like to join, go to rootandriver.com. click on Being Marketers, and if you hit the join now button, you get a 1-month free trial. So there's really no downside. I encourage you to do that. So we are recording Being Marketers today, and we will send the recording out as well to everyone who's registered. But there is a reason this is live. This is really important to us. We want you to be able to ask Ryan your questions. So please drop any kind of thoughts, questions. We always say rude remarks, maybe not so rude, but like pushback. If you have something where you're like, oh, Ryan, I'm not sure what you meant, drop it in chat. Kat will be on the lookout for those. And we're going to pause about halfway through the discussion so we can grab those questions and pose them to Ryan. So speaking of Ryan, let me introduce him. So Ryan Pirkle is the Director of Marketing at FFW, which is a global digital agency of digital experts building world-class digital experiences and platforms for many leading brands. Ryan has been bringing brands to life in an amazing set of experiences, in my opinion, with big and bold brands for the last 15 years. He has really keyed into meaning, which I think in our prep for today jumped out to me, especially in meaningful customer experiences that are deeply tucked into understanding the audience. He seems so keen on that aspect of marketing. He's done agency and in-house marketing for brands like Qdoba, Restaurant Corp, Miller Coors Brewing Company, Microsoft, Gravity Payments, and now FFW. So his resume is impressive, guys. I think what's special about Ryan is that he made some hard choices in his career in order to stay in alignment with his current truth, what that truth was for him. So that also really stood out to me, and we're going to get into more of how he did that. At the same time, he's not afraid to experiment with new ways of connecting to audiences. So Ryan lives in the Pacific Northwest. He just finished that heat wave and survived. He hasn't melted. He's a proud alum of Washington State University, and his dog's named Mr. Waffles, which I adore. So welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, guys. It means a lot. So I'm really excited for the next hour, and here's to hopefully some good marketing thoughts and some probably terrible analogies. So yeah. And that's such a wonderful introduction too. Thank you. I'm gonna try to get that and then get that clip once this is over and send that to my parents because they still have no idea what I do. So thank you.
You're welcome. So just to kick it off, Ryan, one of the things we talked about in our prep call was you talked about after getting a degree in marketing, or other people who maybe got a degree in a related field. I think yours was in was it communication?
It was in comm, yeah. Marketing was on the business side of the school, which had math courses, so that was a no-go for me.
Yeah, you and I are the same. I got a communication degree because it didn't extra math. So you said that though, once you get that degree, right, especially in this space of marketing and brand, you kind of have to experiment with that a little bit and go into different disciplines, different niches to determine what you really like, what aspect, because marketing is so diverse. So I wanted to ask, was there like a particular moment where after some of that experimentation, it clicked for you on where you really wanted to focus and kind of what your zone of genius was?
Yeah, for sure. So, the funny thing about college, I guess, is, it's hard enough to pick like what discipline you're going to go into. Like, what am I going to major in, right? Everybody has that, the John Mayer quarter life crisis or whatever you want to call it, right? Where everybody's trying to figure out like, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest. But, part of it is, in college, the curriculum that you're in, the classes that you're in, it's such a general kind of broad appeal or broad focus, right? Like you don't really know till you get into the trenches and know what you're doing. And unfortunately, like that's why I think, especially within marketing, I looking back, I think of like the 5 years after graduation, like that's still education at that point. Like, yeah, you're not in university, you're getting paid instead of paying the, exorbitant, education costs. But that's really truly where I think that's where the education comes. That's when you get your degree, is after you cut your teeth for 5 years making slave wages as an entry-level marketing person, right? And so, taking the time to, to really kind of like, well, I guess for me, it was starting somewhere where I knew I'd be able to work on a pretty broad range of projects. And to me, that was the agency realm, right? So, I started an agency down in Los Angeles called Team One, and worked on the Lexus account and really kind of floated around. I think I had 3 different positions and roles within that agency within like 2 years. So definitely floated around, tried to pick up extra jobs where I could, or extra projects on different accounts, that kind of stuff. But basically, I just wanted to be a sponge to soak it all in, because I felt really stupid like the first couple weeks and months in that role, realizing like, yeah, I'm not sleeping until 11 a.m. anymore. And, I'm not going to pound 15 bush lights before, on a Tuesday night, right? Like things change. And so for me, it was like, time to get serious and really try to like figure out, what do I want to do? And I think that mindset, hopefully served me well. It wasn't something where I aspired to be, a leading person in client services at that first agency. It was more just trying to like, treat it like a buffet and try to sample a little bit of every dish that I could to really figure out what I wanted.
I love that idea of treating it like a buffet. Super cool.
That's interesting. I'm curious about when in your journey, and I know you moved from agency to client side, kind of back to agency, and like we've been talking about, this grand experimentation of your skills. Can you recall a time where you started to realize that you were bumping up against, you were being asked to do something in one of your roles that was out of alignment with your values? And how did you handle that early on? Or was that an awareness that came later as you matured?
It did come a little bit further down the road. And I think for me, like probably the most pivotal point in the career where I really honed in on what clicks with me and what I like was 2 past jobs. One of them was with Qdoba. So with Qdoba Restaurant Corporation, I led the marketing activity for the Pacific Northwest region. And I had a supervisor that was also in the Northwest, and that was it. We were just a team of 2. The mothership, right? The headquarters is at Denver. And so we would activate all these kind of top-down different initiatives from corporate, right? But then localize them to Seattle, Portland, Spokane, right? The Pacific Northwest. And I had a supervisor that, maybe I'm not giving her enough credit, but she really gave me a lot of latitude. And at the time I thought it was, well, maybe she's, a little checked out, or, just focusing on other things. Maybe she really trusted me. The point was, though, is I had this latitude that I hadn't experienced before, where I had some freedom to actually do some things and to pull off some ideas. And kudos to Qdoba for also entertaining some of these crazy ideas that we're able to pull off. One of them was getting an old food truck. And this is before like food trucks became, like now, it's a total thing, right? But, this is like 2009, 2010. And so, we ended up getting this old food truck and refurbishing it, and basically what I wanted to do is be able to take Qdoba to people instead of having people come to Qdoba. And I thought the best way was to capitalize on a certain segment that we could go to them where they reliably going to be. And what we had was a new menu item called street tacos. And it was just like a quick, like a very light meal. It was almost like an in-between meal, and they're trying to figure out how to market it. And I thought, being kind of like a 20-something myself, right at the time, I was thinking, this is perfect for 20-somethings who want to go out. They need to get some food in their stomach before they start, taking fireball shots all night and dancing and all that kind of stuff, right? Like dinner it's not like an event when you get older. It's like, oh, let's go out to dinner. That's our Friday night. Before, dinner was just like, I need to get some food in my stomach. I need to get a foundation for my night of partying. So we ended up revamping this food truck and making it decked out to look like a Mexican street taco, to evoke the idea of Mexican street tacos. We had like bougainvillea plants like all over the truck. We had speakers put in, and we did like a very short timeline BOGO offer, like a 2-week expiration, so we could track the effectiveness of it really, really quickly. And then we hit nightlife spots between the hours of like 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. Around the Seattle area. And it ended up being a huge success, and ended up being this program was replicated by basically company-wide, instead of just in Seattle, ended up going in all of our markets, which is really fun. A lot of great people work towards that. I certainly didn't do this alone, but that really gave me a taste of being able to have that latitude to do something really amazing. Well, what happened was I ended up meeting somebody that I worked with, and she became my wife. Not like that. There was like steps in between, of course. It wasn't, like that. But what happened is I ended up moving to Denver, where she was at. And so something had to give. We're redundant, and she's way smarter than me. So I thought, okay, I'll resign. Everybody knew this is happening, and I think half of Qdoba came to our wedding. But so that's at that point I thought, well, I need to find a job here in Denver, and I ended up connecting with an agency called the Integer Group, a shopper marketing agency. And the reason I'm kind of telling the stories is both of these two stops kind of like really shaped the direction that, where I really wanted to go, where things started to click. So Qdoba was a great experience. And at Integer Group, I was on the Miller Coors account, and my job was to activate like different programs and promotions on premise, and then at grocery and C-store segments, right? So these are the types of things you see is like the little if you're at Buffalo Wild Wings or something, like any sort of signage you see on your table, or digital signage or displays, whatever, that are Coors Light or Blue Moon or, Miller Lite, whatever our brands are, like having something like that there. And then in the grocery store C segment, it's things like where you get the little hanging tag off of like a 6-pack that says if you buy a DiGiorno pizza, you get $3, right? So a lot of partner collaboration efforts, that kind of stuff. And it was okay, but going back into that agency realm after getting a taste of that latitude, things quickly soured. And there was one point where I just was over it. And it was kind of it was like a silly story, I guess, but essentially what it was is Miller Coors, the client, came to us and said, we need to raise bottle sales of Coors Light in our grocery and C-store segments. We need to bump that up. At the time, now it's prevalent, but like craft beer was just starting to kind of like become a thing, right? It was this burgeoning threat. And craft beer is typically bought in bottles at grocery store, right? On premise, bar might have 8 taps. Like there's not a ton of competition there, especially if you have the money to lock those down. But in the grocery store segment, they wanted to raise bottle sales, right? And so we were thinking of all these ideas. My team and I at Integer, we had some really, really strong creative ideas. I had some concepts that I thought would really, really play. Some cool interactive things, different types of placemats, like using all the environment within a store. So I was really, really proud of these concepts. We had great empirical data to back up why we thought this is going to be effective. And I've never been more confident going into a conference room and going on the little bridge phone and calling the client and talking through ideas that I had it that day. So very, very, a lot of pride behind this. And we get on the phone, we talk through all these ideas and all that. And there's just this long pause from the client, right? And I'm so confident. I'm thinking, wow, this guy's head spinning. Like this dude is so stoked right now. Like he's floored at how brilliant we are. And of course, that's not what happened. And so he said, yeah, these aren't really hitting it for me. We said, okay, well, which one? Let's talk through these a little bit. Maybe it's something, maybe we didn't communicate it correctly or whatever. And he said, no, I get it. They're fine. But he's like, you guys aren't thinking about this the right way. He goes, we have our own idea. And right then I'm like, oh crap, this is going to be great. And he said, have you ever heard of thermographic ink? I said, all of us kind of look, we're like, no. And he said, well, remember hypercolor shirts back in the day, you could blow on them and they turn a different color. Basically it's ink that responds to heat or cold, right? To temperature, and it changes like those straws you as a kid, or whatever. So we're like, right. Okay. He says, well, here's what we do. He goes, we really want to extol the benefits of Coors Light. It is the Rocky Mountain refreshment, right? That big friggin' train blasts through the mountain and all these bikini models and stuff are on there, right? We want them to feel that. It's like, okay, where are we going with this ink thing? And he said, well, what I want to do, this is what we're going to do, is we'll put thermographic ink on our bottle labels. And when the mountains turn blue, that's when you know it's cold. And this guy had a sense of humor, like it was really dry. And I thought he was joking. Because I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, why would you need to have like thermographic ink on a bottle when it's cold? Just feel it. Like, it's in a cooler. Like you could, probably assume that it's cold. You open up the cooler, you feel the bottle and it's like, yeah, hey, checks out. It's cold. Cool. But no, that wasn't enough. Like we had to have this anyways. So I thought he was joking. So I was like, yeah, yeah, right. And it was really quiet. And I was looking around the room and a couple other people started laughing a little bit when they saw me laughing, and we all thought it was a joke, and it was not a joke. And he said, I don't know why you're laughing, but I'm 100% serious. And this is what we need to do. If you don't like this idea, maybe we need to have a conversation. And it's like, no, let's do the idea. Sure. And so we got briefed on the idea, all of the ideas that we had developed, the concepts that we thought were really powerful, they all went in the garbage. And we did this blue ink thing. And afterwards, like after that call, I was, really like deflated. This is ridiculous. Like this can't work. This is stupid. We had great ideas. They don't want to listen to them. What's the point? Why not just go through the motions? Why don't I just order take? That's how you survive, right? And you fast forward a couple months, and at this point, like things hadn't been the same since that day for me. Well, we turned around the project pretty quickly with our packaging teams, and basically those bottles shipped. And the initial reports were that it was a smashing success. Actually, bottle sales rose, I think, something like 8 or 9% quarter over quarter. And again, it was pretty preliminary. But at that point, I'm like, how did that work? This is so, it doesn't even mean anything. There's no substance to this. Like, what's the point? And at that point, I knew that I was done. And I resigned about a week later and decided that wasn't for me. And coincidentally, my wife was able to get a transfer to Seattle. So I recruited her back to Seattle. And at that point, that's when I knew that, to me, it was like, I mean, let's face it, we're not marketing for the money, right? Like it's not where you go if you want to be driving benzos and all that, right? So we're in it for something else. And that something else for me was to do something that was fun, that really got through the creative side. I think that's why we're all in marketing. Regardless of the role, we're all kind of like armchair creatives or failed creatives, right? Even though designers and creative staff hate that, account people and the business side of things think that they're designers, right? Still, like we all have that need and that we have that desire within us to do something really special. Maybe it's ego driven. Maybe it's like a monument to ourselves or whatever, to point at something and say, I did that. But pointing at blue ink on bottles, that was not something I wanted to say I did that. And that was not something I had pride in. And so that's at that point, it's really kind of clicked with me that I want to do something where we can affect meaningful change and we can affect, strategy that's meaningful and there's true intent behind it. Not just doing something where the mountains turn blue,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great story. And you're such a good storyteller. I mean, but I think a lot of people in that circumstance would have gotten really jaded, but also not done anything about it. I mean, there's a lot of people, we use the term sometimes that are RIP, retired in place.
Right.
That says a lot about you, that you were like, I resign, this is not for me and I need to shift it somehow.
Yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me of our team we went to a songwriting circle in Austin a few years ago, and hosted by Jack Ingram. Longer story, but there's this guy named Bobby Pinson, and Bobby Pinson is super prolific songwriter. Has written like 25 #1 songs, and he was playing some of his songs, and he said in kind of not jaded, but a little bit of a morose way. He goes, well, the thing about this business is you got to write shitty songs to pay for your good songs. And I think I had a similar experience on the agency side of things, where I was the co-founder of the agency, and I was like, I don't like this. I don't like this feeling of just because it works, let's do it. I know that sounds crazy, but what about the art? And I'm still sort of a snob that way. So I feel you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And at the time, I didn't know it was going to be this conscious total pivot in a career trajectory. Just to me, it was all very immediate. It was like, okay, well, this is the context I'm using when I'm going to look for, my next stop in my career, relocating back to Seattle. I want to make sure I find something where I'm going to be able to channel what was good at Qdoba, that latitude and that freedom to do something to really affect change and be able to see the results of it, not to pull Red Bull sessions for weeks straight, coming up with the strategies either to be discarded or, it gets activated, but what's the point? What if they would have gone with those ideas? Okay, bottle sales go up, 3% in the grocery segment. Would anybody know if I lived or died? I know that's really heavy, right? But does anybody even care, right? What's the point of why am I doing this? What's the point?
Right. I think a lot of it goes back to that marketing order taker, something that we talk about a lot, and we coach our CMO clients to move from that mindset into a more strategic mindset. You really have to, but I think in marketing, one of the challenges is it's so much less resistance to be the order taker. So you can kind of fall into a zone where you're atrophying those creative skills that you talked about. And you're just like, okay, fine. Yeah, whatever it is. But I think having the awareness to spot that and say, no, I am a creative, even if it's an ego trip. I want to exercise that part of myself. But here's another rub that I think comes up in marketing. And you, I think, have had experience in your next iteration in your story around this, but marketing is definitely a behind the scenes job. I feel it is. And branding too, for us, we're always putting our clients at the front of the brand. So when it comes to working with big brands or big personalities, and then holding that space for yourself as a creative, is that something that you've tussled with? And then how do you handle that? Do you find yourself getting depleted from that, or I'm just curious about that whole interplay for you, especially with what you did next to Gravity.
Yeah. I love being behind the scenes. I love being the guy behind the gal or guy so much, because you can still affect and accomplish what you want, right? You can still influence the direction of things, the strategy, the creativity, all that can happen. It's just, you're not the manifestation of it in front of a camera or on a microphone or on a stage, right? And so for me, that's my comfort zone. I mean, being here with you right now, this is, I was contemplating, maybe I should line up a few shots first. And I'm like, no, I probably shouldn't, because then the whole cussing thing will probably happen. But it's something where I love having focus on everything that goes into something and not having the distraction of being on camera, thinking, how am I how am I looking? What am I supposed to do with my hands right now? Am I talking, my voice really nasally? Am I smiling enough? All these things, I'd rather focus on really the core intent and the strategy behind everything. And that allows me that vacuum to do that, being, the person behind the person. I love being behind the scenes. And I try to channel that a little bit too, even with the current work at FFW, where it's not PR related, where a lot of the success and work and experience I had at Gravity was, we're behind the scenes we're almost channeling this mentality for our work with our clients. We have these, a whole spectrum of different types of clients. They just tend to be very, most of them are very notable, recognizable brands. They're very large brands and large names. But, what we do is the team's so tired of me saying this, but we don't just, we build websites, right? Sure. Oversimplify it, right? But anybody can do that. 1,000 companies can build a friggin' website. Why us, right? What's the big picture? Why do we exist? And I think that's a really big question. It's the Simon Sinek power of why kind of stuff, right? That idea of well, why do we exist and why does it matter? And for FFW, it exists because, and I promise that this is relevant, is because it comes back to being the person behind the person. And I think that's how I like to position our agency, is that, FFW, what we do, we don't just hand them a website and here's the keys and say, right on, good luck, see you guys. Instead, it's really ensuring that they're going to have impact. And where this goes to the guy behind the guy or the guy behind the gal thing is that what we've aligned on kind of as our why is that we help our clients, these big, bold brands, right? That could go to any 999 other competitors have a website build, whatever. But what we help them do is become the best version of themselves, right? We make it so they can accomplish their goals, their vision. They can seize the future. They can do it just a little bit easier thanks to us. And so that's where we are. We're kind of the guy behind the person on that, in that way.
Well, we get that. I mean, with our CMO or VP head of marketing clients, we we work for them. The company that they work for pays us, but we work for them, and it's in that support role. And one of our clients, we haven't done this in a while, but we would have days that were just set aside to take care of him, like brainstorm, conversation, like really taking care of the human, which is where Being Marketers came from. That idea of, we forget that there are human beings behind all of these things, behind all these initiatives. So, so we had a happy coincidence that I don't think we uncovered until our prep call, in that your previous gig with Gravity was with Dan Price. And some of you may know this, but Dan's father, Ron, has been a dear friend and mentor for many years, and introduced me to Emily 7.5 years ago. So the collision of stars is happening related to that thing. And we'd love to hear about that experience that you had, within, reduced amount of time, what that Gravity was like to be the man behind the man in this particular case.
Yeah. It's funny. So one of in our prep call for everybody on this, or joining us today, like, I forget Justin or Emily who asked me this, but it was like, what was the kind of the high point in your career? What's been the low point? And they're the same one. And it was Gravity, right? Like, it was both the best of worlds for me to accomplish something, really, really incredible. And, to really do it with no resources, and really kind of do it alone. And in another way, it was really the worst experience, because the anxiety, the stress, the hours, and then again, being all alone on this, right? Like, it was really, really hard. But, essentially at Gravity, and that was the next stop after Integer Group. And I talked about the blue ink on the bottles, looking for something a little deeper. And there was this company called Gravity Payments. They do credit card processing. And that industry, it sucks so bad. Like, it's so predatory and terrible. And the thing is with credit card processing, is like every business nowadays needs to accept credit cards. There's just it's so easy. Like, honestly, like the three of us could start a credit card processing company within a week, and get a storage unit, get some equipment. Basically all it is sales. And essentially, it's almost like a commodity, right? Like, you have like, it's like you have one water company. It's like having 1,000 water companies calling you all the time, talking about how cold their water is. And it was a similar situation in a way to what I brought up with FFW, right? Where it's like, oh, 1,000 companies could build you a website. Well, it was doubly true within credit card processing, right? Like, there's all these companies you can go with, and it's the same service. Like, it's not like somebody's data runs a little faster, or like one credit card swiper is, has a special, like, lubricant coating that allows it to go. I'm like, no, it's all the same. It doesn't matter. It's all the same equipment. So how do we differentiate ourselves there, right? And that was the big part where everything kind of led into this big PR firestorm with the CEO, Dan Price. And so when I started, it was like, what can we talk about? We're not the lowest cost. We're not going to paint this story that's not really authentic or real. That's just going to come bite us in the ass later. So it's like, what do we want to talk about? And the thought was, well, we have this CEO, this wonderkind, right? Like this 28-year-old Jesus haired looking dude. And, he was basically, what we decided was to make him like the human manifestation of our brand, because it is a total like nondescript industry. Like, nobody knows about it unless you own a business for the most part. And even then, the reputation that most people don't know about, but if you do know about it, it's terrible. So why don't we actually have a human to it? That makes it more trust, there's more trust involved. There's a person. And so we thought, well, let's build this platform that he has. He's a really, really smart dude. He started his company at 19. He bootstrapped it with some family members. Like, this guy's not going anywhere. He had no designs on selling ever. And so I thought, well, this is our rock. We're going to tie basically who we are as a company to this dude. And so what we started doing was trying to build his platform. Well, we can create content, his point of view on helping small businesses and empowering them and that kind of stuff. But nobody's going to listen if he doesn't have a platform. So we had to build that. We started applying him to different awards, local ones like GeekWire Entrepreneur of the Year Award. And then like Entrepreneur Magazine had an Entrepreneur of the Year Award. We hustled really hard, and the whole theme, everything Gravity's been kind of punching above our weight class, more than we had any right to in the industry that we were in, nondescript. And, frankly, being like the 48th largest credit card processing company, like in the corner of the country in Seattle, like who knows? And so we had to make it something big. So we started getting him all these awards and applying for those. And then he started to get some speaking engagements. Then from there, he had a bit of a platform. And that's really when like the big idea that if anybody has heard of gravity payments before, it's going to be because of this. And at that point, it was about a year and a half in to my tenure at Gravity. And I built the team up from just myself to, I think there's 4 of us at that point, still a very small team. And he said, Ryan, I have this idea. He said, what do you think if we set a $70,000 minimum wage at our company? And I thought, yeah, right. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that. And he's like, I'm serious. And I was like, oh, I'm having flashbacks to Integer when I laughed at the client. And I was like, all right, well, I mean, I'm sure you ran the numbers. Like, why do you want to do this? And he said, I think it's important to do this because one, we want to show that we're empowering our people, our frontline people that are typically the lowest paid. Some of them were making like 30,000. They were going to have their salaries double. And it's a good show of support to, all the clients that we have and prospective clients we want to get, is that we invest this much in the front line. We can really talk about our service. He said, do you think we can get any PR out of this? I said, yeah, I definitely think we can. And so, we had about 4 weeks to work with, and I started figuring out like, okay, well, what's our message going to be? We had no PR agency, no PR consultants or anything like that. It was just Dan Price, our CEO, and me riffing on ideas and thinking through them, and me trying to get creative. And what I realized is that I'm like, we could link this to something so much bigger, because this is the problem is that nobody knew what gravity payments was, or even Dan Price was, or anything for that matter, right? So why would anybody care what we're doing for a modest sized company of 120 people? We're going to, set a 70K minimum wage. That's great, but it's marginalia, right? How do we make it bigger? And I thought, well, what we need to do is align it to something that's much, much bigger than just us, much bigger than 70K minimum wage, or much bigger than Seattle. And to me, that was, at the time, there was a lot of different within Seattle, New York, and LA, and I think a few others talking about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And we thought, what if we were to hitch our wagon to this national conversation topic of income inequality, right? And we talk about empowering, our the lowest paid employees and what it can do, and we could almost make gravity payments the business case for talking about how if you pay people a true living wage, like your company will still succeed. It's almost like capitalism with a heart, right? It's a truly like capitalist approach to something that is like decidedly not capitalist, if that makes sense. And so by aligning it to the $15 an hour minimum wage and a few other topics, at that point now it was bigger than ourselves. And that's when I had the PR strategy. Basically, let's shoot the moon and then kind of trickle down from there. So at that point, it was just me, 80-hour weeks, just hitting up anybody I could, working anybody I could talk to at New York Times, right? Like looking at past articles that different journalists had written about on staff at the New York Times, and finding which ones really tend to key in on these national conversation points that we aligned ourselves with. And, I'm not going to make a long story short, I'll gloss over it. We did find her person. She was interested, and I explained why it would matter to her. Here's why it's going to be of value for you. This basically reinforces a lot of the things that your other topics have talked about. Some of the ideas that you're kind of indirectly getting across. I know it's not editorial, but there is a bit of a skew, no offense. And I think this helps reinforce it. This is a great way that you can do that. Plus, this story is going to have legs. If you break the story, we can look at it a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later. And what's going to happen is people are going to look at this. They're either going to think it's amazing and really, really root for us, or they're going to think this is a total socialist agenda kind of thing. And like, man, I can't wait till they fail. And no matter what, though, people are going to be watching, right? Like popcorn eating gift, like they're going to be waiting to see what happens with this. So the story has legs. It's something you can keep going back to, and you could break it. And the New York Times reporter loved it, and she said she'd do it. And then I said, okay, that's part of it, but what we need is a spectacle, right? We need to really bring home the emotional, like when people figure out their salaries are going to double, like what are the reactions going to be? So we staged basically an all hands meeting, planned it out. I said, we need to capture video. And what we did is one of the local NBC affiliate station here in Seattle, King 5, I met one of the reporters named Joe Fryer, right when we were building Dan's thought leadership platform. And I think they had done like a short little like local news piece on us. At the time, it was a huge PR win for us, right? And at that time, he'd gotten promoted as the West Coast correspondent for NBC News. And I still had his number in my phone. So I just shot him a text and said, here's the deal. I gave him the brass tacks. And I'm like, New York Times is going to cover this. You can have exclusivity over this spectacle we're going to create. Dan's going to announce this to everybody, and you can capture their reactions. And he said yes. So we had NBC News and a bunch of cameras from them and New York Times. The story broke. The next day, the next week was just a whirlwind, but essentially what happened was it became top trending on Facebook, on Twitter, on Reddit, national headlines everywhere at that point. Our website crashed due to traffic coming to it. It was about 150x increase in traffic overnight. And then the next day, so the New York Times thing hit about 2 a.m. Pacific, and then NBC News, the morning news. I woke up, somehow people got my cell phone number, and I had calls from Good Morning America, from the Today Show, from Ellen, like all these different, they all wanted to talk to Dan. They all wanted to interview him. And so, we got his ass on a plane, sent him east, and then I coordinated everything from a control room. I'm like basically just lining up all these different news hits and interviews for him. After that week, the story had definitely blown up and ended up being one of the most viral stories of 2015. And it was transformative for our business. We had 30,000 job applications in the first month. Within a year, our revenue had easily doubled, and it continued to grow after that, especially as we continued to kind of evolve the story and think of different angles to keep it fresh. So it wasn't a flash in the pan, because news cycles were so short and fleeting. So how do we continue to get longevity out of it? And that was really the next focus after, that initial mayhem.
It's such an incredible story. And as you mentioned, we sort of were aware of what was going on, and knowing, Dan and Dan's dad. So it's so cool to meet you, the man behind the scenes there. But I want to pause here because I think we have some questions that came in, so we can get some questions, and then I have a bunch as well. I'm sure Justin does too. So Denise asks, with regard to Ryan and Justin's comments about the Blue Mountains, to not just because it works, let's do it. How do you not integrate that into financial dependency on something working? So I think maybe the gist of this is especially as smaller brands or solopreneurs, there's an investment, right? Usually when you're like, okay, I have this creative idea, but I got to invest in it financially and energy wise. And so how do you gauge, any tips for how you gauge what to invest in or what instincts to listen to?
Right. That is a good question. Yeah. And it's almost like, I almost interpret that question too, as when do you decide, when to fall on your sword, right? Like, what battles do you want to pick? And that's what made that whole story so hard at Integer Group with Miller Coors, is that it was an effective strategy. I thought it was ridiculous. It was the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And it worked. And that was really hard. And for me to pivot away from that, it was definitely an ego decision, right? Because it did work. And I can't say for sure, even though I love the concepts, we had developed as a team, and they very well could have been more impactful. It's going to be Schrodinger's concept, right? We don't know whether it would have or not. It doesn't matter. But we know the one that the client said is Blue Mountains. It actually did work. So it's hard, right? If it wasn't an ego thing for me, and when I mean ego, is what do I want to do? A selfish decision, not like a business decision. And I think that's the hardest thing to parse out is it a selfish decision for you, or is it truly a business decision? If it's a selfish decision, if it's one for yourself, then really it's up to you. The metrics don't matter at that point if there's a business case for it or not. Maybe you're just in the wrong role, or you're on the wrong project, or whatever, right? And I think that's okay to tap out of something like that whenever it's possible. If it truly is more of a business driving decision, there's times, certainly since then, it's not like I've, anytime there's an idea that I don't like, I don't just give the middle finger to it, then, plug my ears and close my eyes, right? No, there's times you oblige and you do pick your battles. And sometimes, even though it's not the most fun project, engaging project, or even really what you think is going to work, if there is a strong business case for it, you just have to suck it up and see it through, right? And there's been plenty of times where that's happened again since, it happens all the time, right? We all deal with that, where it's something where we don't necessarily aren't fully bought in. We think it's the best idea, the best strategy. We don't have empirical data to prove that it's not. And we can't say that it's not a good idea. It just doesn't seem like the best idea. Sometimes we have to just deliver. We have to just cut our losses or draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, let's push this through, let's deliver. Otherwise, we're going to pontificate on this for another year and argue about something and nothing's going to happen.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Reality-based answer.
Yeah.
Doesn't always feel good, but you do. And I think the other thing that comes up, from your stories too, is that sometimes the client or the leader, they have a sense of something that maybe as the more internal facing team leader of marketing, you don't have, right?
Really.
I know that I've been humbled by that as well in my career. And yeah, sometimes it is something that they just kind of know.
Oh yeah, I've been humbled many times too, but to me, it's like, that little egg on the face or the humility, like the other option is just not sharing your ideas. And then again, that goes right back to the top of the call. Are we just comfortable? Are we getting fat and lazy? Are we becoming order takers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's such an interest. I always compare it to art, or music in this particular case of like Bobby Pinson said, like, I think it's important, and you did this, Ryan, and I know, Em, you've been at these crossroads too, is you have to decide what's most important to you. You have to know where the edge is or the boundary. And like a lot of things in life, that there's nuance between great idea, a great idea well executed, or a average idea well executed. If you're just trying to get to some business goal and it's not a violation of your ethics, then that's probably fine. I think it's when it starts to bump up against that feeling of being unethical or wrong or off, not even about it from a creative standpoint. And I'm not saying what the Coors and the Blue Mountains and all that was something unethical. It was, sort of just giving the people what they want in a lot of ways. I think that Ryan Holiday writes about this in Perennial Seller, is that the long game of your brand, however, will not be because you made some sort of short-term gimmick.
Yes.
That's the lesson. And so branding is making bourbon. We're not making beer, or grape juice. We're making something that we want to have and to be enduring, which is one of our favorite words. And that requires a patient CMO, and a patient CEO, and a brave CEO, and a brave CMO as well.
So Ryan, you strike me as somebody you've alluded to this in several different answers, that you kind of like are faced with a challenge and you go away and you're creating ideas. You're coming back with like a little popcorn of all these little ideas that are kind of bubbling. So I'm curious, because I think you are a very creative person, about your process. Like when you are presented with a new challenge, where do you go for inspiration? Where do you go for that creative impulse? Who do you take with you? How do you involve your team in that? How do you present it to them?
Oh, that's a great question. So I guess it's not like a planned out process, but this is typically the steps I'll go through is usually I'll think of like, what's the most immediate idea that would come to my head, right? Like if we're going to have there's something we want to accomplish. There's a challenge, there's some sort of need, whatever it is, like what's the first idea? And I note that, and then I discard it. So I'm like, that idea can't be good. If it's the first idea I have, right? That means that probably a lot of other people are doing that, and it's too surface level. The next thing I do is, and this is really probably the most important thing for me overall in marketing, is really honing in on my sense of internal scrutiny. Like we all have it, like we're all marketed to, right? Like my inbox blows up from vendors. I know your guys' does too. It's just ridiculous, right? And you're skeptical already, and you read through this, and not that you're even considering their wares or their services. You're just actually just scrutinizing like their marketing message, because we can't turn it off, right? Like we're psychos. And so like, for me, it's like being incredibly skeptical ahead of time, even though if I don't have the idea yet, like basically come up with what's not going to work, what's going to turn me off, what's going to make me roll my eyes, like what's not going to be persuasive at all. That's probably the biggest thing, is anticipating all the different points of skepticism and pushback, this theoretical idea that hasn't really been baked out yet, right? And then once we've kind of like identified this minefield, right, with all these different things, these ideas that are not going to work, at that point, then we can kind of see, and we have kind of a clear slate then to think of concepts that might actually work, what's going to resonate. And for me, it's all about anticipating. And this is really all about empathy, right? And that's like the biggest single, like, whatever, like principle when it comes to marketing for me, is employing empathy. But that's part of it, is anticipating the skepticism of your audience and what they actually care about. It seems so 101, right? But that to me, I think, is like thinking through that experience. And I don't know if that's given enough levity. I don't know if it's given enough weight from fellow marketers, including myself. I'm guilty of it too, is thinking through like, what are people actually going to care about and what's that experience like? Experience is a term that's thrown around a lot, right? But everything is an experience, right? There's not bad experience, good experience, like benign experience that you don't care about. It's totally forgettable. Everything's an experience. So how do we make that experience actually matter, right? And that, I think, is really what drives the different concepts, is thinking through, what response do we want to affect, right? Like, we want to engineer a specific response. And the response isn't, I'm going to click through on the call to action. Like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess so. Like, that's the quantifiable part. It's very important, right? Like, yeah, we need to drive metrics, but it's more like, what's the responses in, like, what are we going to trigger within them? Is something that piques their interest? Is it curiosity? Or is it like empathizing with them? Like, you're probably feeling, these frustrations right now with your digital platform or your capabilities. You don't have a lack. Do you feel like you have no sense of control? Like, leading with that and those types of messaging, and really having those be the drivers of these different concepts. So it's almost like starting at the end and working your way back in a way.
It's so, in this work you're doing now, and FFW is a big firm with working on big brands. I'm curious about what biases about marketing and branding do you run into on the client side now? Where you are having to sort of unlearn something that they picked up along the way about branding and marketing and lead gen and the whole digital, all of it.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things for me coming into FFW is, well, first off, like, my background, right? It's in burritos and beer, right? Like, it's not, and in credit card processing, it's not digital experience platforms, right? Or anything really digital. In fact, if anything, I feel sometimes like I have like a boomer resume, right? Because like, it's so decidedly definitely utilize digital channels and tools, but it's not something I'm used to extolling the benefits of or really knowing a ton about. And, the first month or two I was here, it was like, maybe even longer, there was really part of me was like, shoot, like, I really feel dumb. I have so much to learn. I feel like a complete idiot, right? I'm a layman. But leaning into that, I was able to kind of embrace like not knowing what's going on, because I didn't understand like a lot of the marketing that already existed, a lot of the marketing assets, the content that we had, these case studies, or listening to other folks on my team were brilliant. But I listened to them talk and I'm like, I have no idea what the hell they're talking about. And then it clicked with me that it's like, well, like, the lion's share of, our, the decision makers and decision influencers at, our prospective companies, ones we want to target, they're actually marketing people, and they're basically my counterparts. And if I don't understand this, how the hell are they going to understand this? And I think that's kind of been the biggest, like, high level thing at FFW is it's not fabricating, the benefits. Like, we have an amazing team. We have brilliant team. We have a great setup. Everything's awesome. I'm not just saying that because, they're feeding me, but, I truly believe it. And that's not for nothing, especially in marketing. We don't have to manufacture those things or to fake it, but we're doing a good job of telling people what we do and why it matters. I think it almost seemed like, I'm not saying it's anybody's intention, but it almost seemed like we're trying to sound like the smartest people in the room. And we didn't need to do that. What we need to do is really connect with people and empathize with them. And it's okay to use terminology that aren't the smartest words, right? The most cutting edge terms or whatever, like, just to get more brass tacks so they can actually care about what you're talking about. Then you can flex your brain muscles, further down the line. If you start with that, you're going to lose them. Nobody's going to care. And to me, that's been probably the biggest change that I've been trying to affect, where it's something that's not just within our marketing communication, but it's all points of external communication. Whether it's, our sales presentations and new business pitches to some of the wonderful things my teammate Ricardo's doing within a partnership channel. And then, of course, everything marketing, and then a comprehensive update to all the content on our website, which is almost complete. So, that's been kind of the biggest, like, mutual learning thing, I think, for FFW is really changing the entire way that we communicate.
I mean, so many of the things that you're saying really resonate with our approach. We believe all great brands are spiritual experiences, right? So we always begin with the feelings first, the emotion first, and that's where all decisions are made. And so, but we can, that definitely applies to messaging, but it applies to knowing your audience as well. And, when we work on audience, the way that we come at it, we say, part of connecting to the audience is you being emotional about it. And if we can get you emotional about it, then you can transfer that to your audience. Without that,
That's great. That's great.
You're just talking about like features, and so many people spend so much time trying to convey what their features are, and particularly in the tech space, because they really have been taught that that's what differentiates them. But as you said, it definitely doesn't.
And if I was to say there was a kind of almost like a singular crisis within corporate marketing, is that the grind of the role, 70, 80 hours a week, if you're on the client side corporate marketer, and sometimes on the agency side too, it is not glamorous. It is a grind. Yet the thing that marketing is supposed to do is to connect to someone's heart and soul. But if in that process you become disconnected from your heart and soul, that's where cynicism kicks in, or just straight up seeing humans as abstracts and using manipulative ways to get them to buy shit they don't want or need. Right. And that's what we sometimes say, the branding and marketing has been a dark art in a lot of ways. And propaganda and sloganizing and rampant consumerism. But it's the thinking that you're talking about and that we're talking about, and why we're spiritually aligned with what you guys are doing, that is around that branding and marketing can just as equally be used as a tool of good. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, using branding as a tool for good and doing good in the world has a tremendous ROI. It used to be that the ROI of being an asshole was much higher. Now it's the ROI being a good person, a good brand, a good culture is way higher than being an asshole. So that's progress.
No, I totally agree with you. And I honestly think that, at a certain point, whether we've reached it or not, like I think things are already trending, but I think there'll be a dam that breaks at some point where I think marketers are going to be forced to market this way, because I don't think it's going to be viable to do it the other way anymore. People are they're becoming, on one hand, I think everybody is becoming more savvy and more skeptical, right? They're keeping that barrier of skepticism up, and marketers, these black hat marketers or whatever, right? Like they're thinking of all new tricks and tactics to try to break through that constantly. But at a certain point, like, they're spending all their energy and time on trying to game the system instead of just taking that time and energy and coming across with a message that actually matters. I don't understand why these companies and why these marketers aren't taking that energy and creativity and just it's almost like the person that has like a really important exam back in school, right? And like there's the one person that spends like 12 hours figuring out like this way to cheat by they put like, within their watch, they can scroll through and get all the notes and all that. And it's like, if you took half of that time and just studied the material and actually learned it, like what are you doing, right? But like people are always looking for shortcuts. And I think that's the hard part, Justin, to what you're talking about, what we're all talking about here, is having that authentic message, one that has a true intent behind it. And it's not one of deception. Like to me, like that's a much longer play. And to get those returns are not going to be instant returns, especially when you start looking at like service-based companies where you can't discount a product or talk around something. It really becomes consultative. Like that sales timeline, from awareness to conversion is going to be so long. And it's almost like in a good way, it's like the long con, right? But it is so much more powerful. It isn't fleeting.
Yeah, it makes me sad that Florida Georgia Line is famous as a country band, even though they don't do country. And it makes me sad that maybe the emus work for Northwestern Mutual. Maybe they work. Wouldn't that be terrible? What a terrible thing to arrive at, where you're like, these are the stupidest things ever, but they worked.
They must. Yeah.
I don't know that they must. I just think you don't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah. Otherwise,
the David Ogilvy quote, 50% of marketing doesn't work. We just don't know which 50%. Or
that's such a good one.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, you said you were going to give us a poor analogy, but that one was pretty good that you used in the last answer about cramming for the exam. So next time.
Yeah. It's dumb luck. I swear to you, like my analogies are so bad. I feel bad for my team. They have to listen to this.
That really makes sense. So yeah, next time we'll have to have that.
There was one question that came in before we wrap. I just want to make sure we get to, which is a good one that we get quite a bit, which is what books or podcasts would you recommend folks listen to, Ryan? What are some things that are kind of your main like sources of inspiration, or something that really framed your thinking?
Yeah. So business books wise, marketing business, whatever. So my last company that Dan Price, the CEO, huge voracious appetite for books, right? The guy would read like crazy and he really expected me to do the same, and which is fine. Here's the thing. Most business books I've read, like they're either too high level where it's not practical. Like you're reading along, you're like, yeah, this makes sense. And you close the book, you're like, I don't know how to apply any of that. Like, I don't know what that means. Or it's so specific, right? And this may be a little bit more for podcasts. They're so specific on tactics. And there's some, like, listen to, God, I can't even think of any of them right now. I don't know the names because they're all queued up. But anyways, they're always about like, here's how to, optimize this or that, or here's how to do this or connect this or that. And it's so practical and like tactical, but it's so narrow. It's not like a big picture. And that's where I've kind of had, like, they're just not resonate. There's not sticking power. There's more than one book, but there's one book in particular that I absolutely was like transformative for me. And it might be a personal thing. This might be not be the same for everybody else, but like naturally, I don't have a strong sense of like self-confidence. I never really have. And, going back to like having these ideas and wanting to champion them, having that latitude and then pushing those ideas forward, right? Like it's a very scary proposition. It's easier to go with the flow. And I had trouble making decisions basically. And there's a book called Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. And that book was incredible for me. It's not a marketing specific book or even a business book. It just really helps out with decisions because as humans, to simplify decision-making processes, we put an artificial constraint on ourselves of making it binary. It's black and white, do this or that. There's a fork in the road, right? Whatever. But this book, and I'm not giving it credit, but like essentially what it does is that it helps you recognize that there's a bunch, it's not black and white. There's all these shades of gray. Like a decision is never truly binary. There's always other ways to approach it and look at it and other concessions and options, things like that. And it really has like a lot of like practical examples for you to think through. And they were great for me, not only within my career, but then also just in the personal life of making decisions, because it's something that always gives me a source of anxiety. And I reread that book once a year. I've read it 6 years ago for the first time, and I just finished my 6th reading of it back in March. So, and it's great. And there's things I forget and can reapply. So I love that book and would highly recommend it to anybody who might feel like they're kind of in the same situation as me.
Awesome. Wonderful. Those guys are great. They have a few really powerful books. So thank you for sharing that. And we are just about at time. So we want to thank you, Ryan, so much for spending an hour with us and for sharing all of your wisdom. We are just really honored to have had you with us. So thanks so much for coming.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That means a lot coming from the Gold Star girl too. So.
Yeah, I should have that on my name on Zoom.
Absolutely.
For all of you who joined us, thank you also for coming. And we have another Being Marketers webcast. We do these every other month. So our next one will be, Justin?
Our next one will be in September, and it's going to be with Sarah Hawley. Sarah is she's a serial entrepreneur that has launched a new company that is becoming basically the main recruiter for virtual workers. And so that's coming up on Thursday, September 2nd at this same time slot of 3 p.m. Central. So check your inbox, our social feeds and all for that. Sarah's a fascinating person. And we met her through a group that we're a part of called Consciousness Leaders. And she really is sort of the embodiment of a lot of the things similar to Ryan and the way you operate your life. Sarah is the embodiment of a lot of the things that we admire in people and especially CEOs and founders like she is. So check that out.
All right. Thank you so much. And again, if you want to have more of this type of concept, please join our community, Being Marketers. Go to our website, click on Being Marketers. And then when you click join now, you'll be sent to a 1-month free trial. So we hope everybody shows up in the community so we can continue the conversation.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, audience.
Thank you, guys.
All right, bye.
Bye.